target. Joining me now is independent advisor, Alliance Chief Investment Officer, Chris Zaccarelli. Chris, good to see you. Thanks very much for being here. The big event of the week is Wednesday. The Consumer Price Index expected to be up 0.3%. What are your expectations?
Yeah, you're right. The big news for the week will definitely be the inflation data. And, we've seen a number of prints in a row that have been higher than expected. We think the series will be a little bit noisy. We think there's a possibility that not only would we get 0.3%, but possibly even a little bit lower. We could get 0.2%. But so far, the trend has been in the wrong direction. It's been higher, and that's really been a problem for the bond market. And you've seen what that's done to the stock market, especially in April. We've seen a little bit of a recovery in May, and I think that's due to a little bit softer jobs data and the hopes that potentially inflation will start to cool, and the idea that Powell said that rate hikes are not on the table at this point. We've definitely seen the number of rate cuts go down from 6 to possibly 3 or 2 or maybe none at all, as you mentioned, with Fed Governor Bowman talking about no cuts for this year. But ultimately, it's the rate hikes that are a real problem for the market. So let's see what happens with the inflation data. If it does start ticking back higher, that is a concern.
Yeah, and then, of course, we've got the April Producer Price Index out tomorrow. There, economists are expecting prices to rise 0.3% month over month and 2.2% year over year. I know it's really the Consumer Price Index that most people are talking about because we've had 3 straight months of hot readings, Chris. And, you've got rent, you've got oil at elevated levels. These are the essentials: food, fuel, and shelter. Do you see any alleviating on that front in the near term?
Yeah, so I think in the near term, the biggest problem is going to be shelter. Clearly energy prices have been higher. We've all seen food prices higher. I think there's a possibility that energy prices stabilize or go a bit lower as long as the world doesn't get more dangerous. But at least for now, the biggest problem to inflation that I can see, and I think is being talked about in the Wall Street Journal and other outlets, is really that the shelter component of inflation. That does seem to be pretty sticky and hasn't really been coming down the way a lot of people had hoped it would.
So I know that you're invested in developed markets like Europe and Asia, not as much as in emerging markets. The sentiment has changed around China, for sure. We spoke with Greg Brown the other day on this program from the Milken Conference. He's the chairman and CEO of Motorola Solutions. Watch what he told me about his business in China. Watch this.
Motorola had $3.5 billion of revenue in China and 15,000 employees. Today, we have virtually no revenue and 50 employees. So after these infractions going back a decade and a half ago, we made the decision, get out of China. It's not a productive market. They don't play on even terms. The Communist Party leads the theft of intellectual property and patents. So the addressable market of $66 billion that we pursue for public safety and national security is zeroing out China. We left that market.
So that's a corporate CEO there, completely blowing off China, while there are others who feel there's this opportunity with 1.5 billion people, despite all of their bad behavior and undermining the United States. As an investor, how do you see it?
Yeah, I think he expresses the problem really well. The idea of, intellectual property theft, the idea that they don't play by the same rules as the global community. China has always been an opportunity in terms of a rising lower class and middle class. Clearly, with over 1 billion people, what a great market to go after. But American companies have seen time and time again that it just isn't worth it going into China, despite the opportunities that seem to be there. Their government really has not allowed our businesses to do what they want to do in China. I would say if you're looking for emerging markets opportunities, you've got to pivot to India. India has a lot of the same things going for it that China had 20, 30 years ago. There's a lot of opportunity there, a lot of opportunity economically for them to move their citizens up the value chain. And the difference is they seem to be a lot more friendly to the United States, and it's not as nearly as contentious as what we're seeing with China. So as an emerging markets investor, someone who's looking to take some risks and potentially economies that are emerging, India seems to look a lot better than China, at least right now, as opportunities for investors and for businesses.
That sounds great. Liz Peek, jump in here.
Good morning, Chris. Question about the Fed. If we see the Fed hesitate this time around the next meeting, what about the politics of cutting rates closer to the election? Is that something you think is going to influence the Federal Reserve?
The Federal Reserve has always talked about maintaining their independence, very important to them. You can see Chairman Powell gets that question a lot, and I think it's something that they are very worried about. They can talk about how they're not going to let the election factor into their thinking, but clearly it's the appearance of political, overtones as they get closer to the election. So I think it has to be in the back of their minds that if they're going to make a move, they're going to make a move either a few months ahead of the election, not right before the election, or wait until after. Our best guess is that if they do cut rates one time this year and not zero, they may do it in December and just wait till after the election, because to your point, the last thing they want to do is threaten the appearance of their independence, despite the fact that they maintain they don't think about the election at all, which as human beings, I think is hard to believe, because clearly everyone is thinking about it.
Yeah, of course. Great to have you this morning, Chris. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
All right. Chris Zaccarelli joining us. Your morning